Hello everybody, welcome back to the Africa module. Today we are talking about the beginning of the political factors. Alright, just to remind you, if you ever get confused about where we are in this module, go back to page 12 and it's quite a helpful place to kind of just see where we're working through. We've now worked our way through all four physical factors that could potentially explain low levels of development in Africa. We've worked now through all four economic, and we make a start today on the political factors, the first of which is colonialism. Okay, so there's a little bit of revision here from year one, but let's start with a map that I showed you in your introduction to Africa back when we were physically in college and life was more normal. Anyway, obviously this is an incomplete map. It's a best guess at most. What we're trying to get across is that before colonialism, and I am going to explain what that is for those of you that don't know, so don't worry, but before colonialism, there were various tribal groups, political areas in Africa. We estimate that there were between 6,000 and 10,000 of them, and they were probably overlapping in some cases. If I could remind you that the significant thing about many countries in Africa is that they have very seasonal climates. So you have a wet season and a dry season, and therefore the sensible way to behave is to be nomadic, is to move around, and that would explain why the areas overlap, because it was what was sensible and sustainable for the climate. Now, I am not going to try and tell you that at this time everybody was completely peaceful and loved each other and it was all great, but there has been a significant change that was put upon the countries of Africa and these tribal groups by external powers. So we significantly changed it. And what happened is this. Now, the best page for you to follow for this section is page 36 of your module. Now you will find that there's actually not very much in the way of notes on page 36. There's a definition which you've also got in the screen, on the screen in front of you, but you've got a space for notes, so you might want to grab yourselves a pen or a pencil, page 36, and I'll do my best to explain it. Colonialism, in simple terms, is where a country, for example Britain, goes over to another country, occupies it, and rules it. And it's not something we do in the world anymore, really. We're going to talk about neo-colonialism next time, which is quite a different thing. At this point in history, you could turn up in another country, plant your flag, and claim it as yours, and that was sort of acceptable in some ways. And this is all very much revision for year one global governance, where we talk about the British Empire, and we talk about the fact that because we were an island, we were a seafaring nation. It kind of makes sense that if you are an island, you would have ships. Because we had ships, that allowed us to travel around the world, and because of that, we got our empire, and the empire made us the rich and powerful country that we are today. Now, in year two, the focus is very much on the effect of colonialism on the continent of Africa. All right, so the 2 years, we're kind of coming from the same basic topic, but looking at the impact in reverse, if you like. And what we're talking about in this module is something called the Scramble for Africa. And the Scramble for Africa happened in the 1800s. And what happened was this. So the whole continent, with the exception of Ethiopia and Liberia, the whole continent was carved up. We drew lines on a map and we owned these countries. So you can see that the mustard colour became British, and we had significant chunks of this continent ruled by Britain. You can see that France also had a huge map. So this is the Scramble for Africa. And I just want to remind you of something I said in, can't remember which video, but where we were talking about landlocked countries, and I said We talk about landlocked countries under the heading of physical geography, but actually you could argue that that is the fault of human geography. And I just want to remind you, this is where we carved Africa up to a certain extent. It was humans, it was Europeans that drew these lines on the map. And therefore you could argue that this is the beginning of us creating landlocked countries and things like that. Okay, now I have not got time to show you these videos in this video, but I would really recommend that you watch them. The middle one is very simplistic, but it explains colonialism to people who maybe haven't heard of it before, don't know much about it. The first one is a little bit gory in places, for which I apologise, but it's very informative, really helps you understand it. The third one is quite long, it's about 45 minutes, but it will massively help you understand the impact of colonialism on the continent of Africa. And if things were normal, I would have definitely shown you bits of that in class. So if you do have time, if you're not too busy, then it would be brilliant if you could watch those. So what I'm going to do is try to get the key points across to you, but if you could watch them, that would be fantastic. Remember, in previous emails I've given you access to my online Africa folder, where you have access to all of my resources as long as you've got a Hewish email address. Okay, so if you've deleted that email or whatever, just drop me a line and I can send that to you again. Okay, so here are the key ideas. Number one, when you colonise a country, you took resources, or you take resources for your own economic gain. And if you've not noticed the front cover of this module, where we have a sort of, it's meant to be a cartoon, but it's not a funny one, where we've taken all of Africa's riches and they're now all in North America and Europe. That's what the point of that cartoon is that we took their resources, and the timing shouldn't be any surprise. Late 1800s. What was going on in Europe in the late 1800s? Let us think. The Industrial Revolution. So the Industrial Revolution is when you suddenly need a shed load of resources, and if you start to run out of your own, unfortunately the thinking was at that time, let's go and nick somebody else's. So that's one problem. The second problem is a military policy. Now the first video clip on that slide gets the divide and rule, or the divide and conquer policy, across to you really brilliantly. So this is a way of ruling a country. If you want to rule a country of people who really don't like you very much, and generally if you've turned up and colonised a country, you're not particularly welcome. So the way to rule the country is you find a way of turning people against each other, maybe tribal groups, maybe religion. I guess an obvious example would be gender, but I don't think they've ever done that as far as I know in colonialism. So you have your two or more groups of people and you treat them differently, you divide them, you turn them against each other. And it's not nice, but it kind of works, because the two sides are then so busy hating each other that they haven't got time to hate you as the colonial power. So it's a military strategy, this. Now, what happened is, if you can imagine, for 50, 60 years, you had two groups of people that were sort of trained, if you like, to hate each other. Then these countries got independence in the 1960s. So you go, the colonial power leaves, and you leave these two or three groups of people in the same country who absolutely hate each other. So what you leave is a legacy of war and conflict and hatred. And as soon as you've got conflict or genocide or any of the other things that have happened, civil war, that has the complete opposite impact on a country as development does. So development is a process that leads to quality of life getting better and better. War and conflict means that quality of life gets worse and worse and worse. So we've got two very separate problems here that are going to impact the development of these countries. We're taking their resources for our own economic gain. They can't use them to make money for their own development. And we create this legacy of hatred and conflict. Now, for those of you that want to come at this from a different angle. So most African countries got their independence in the 1960s or thereabouts. And this will very much be on your personal opinion, and it will depend on which countries you decide to pick as your case studies. But some people would say, can you say that low levels of development in 2020 can still be the fault of something that happened in the 1960s and before? So some people would say, absolutely, yes, of course you can, because we took all their resources and we've left them with this awful legacy. And you'd get people on the other camp going, no, it's been too long, it's got to be something different. Okay, so any one of these you can sort of counter-argue. Now, in terms of case studies, which is of course what we do, we go through the theory of a topic and then we're like, right, we need to link this to real life. The numbers in brackets are where these countries rank on the Human Development Index at the moment. So Botswana is the best of our 5 and Sierra Leone is the worst of our 5. Okay. What I'm trying to get across to you here is we've got Botswana, Kenya and Sierra Leone that were all British colonies. Botswana is doing quite well in an African context, and we do have to emphasise that. We are comparing African countries to each other, all right, that's really important. In an African context, Botswana's doing quite well, and Sierra Leone is right near the bottom of the pile. They were both British colonies. So maybe it's not quite so simplistic to say colonialism is you know, the bringer of all evil. Democratic Republic of the Congo was Belgian, Burkina Faso was French, neither of those countries are doing particularly well. So it's clearly going to be a little bit of a tough one, and it will depend on what countries you choose. I think you could either choose 2 British ones and compare them to each other, or you could choose a British one and a different country. I think that would provide an interesting contrast. I have said on a few occasions we will try, wherever possible, to link all of your factors back to the 5 key countries that we've chosen. Just in case you're interested, there are some optional others here, 2 of which have got some very powerful films. They are not in any way popcorn movies. These are tough watches. I have watched them. I don't really want to watch them ever again. I mean, they're really powerful, and if you're quite easily upset, then maybe just watch the trailer. Rwanda. Okay, so Rwanda, there's a film about it. Hotel Rwanda is a good film. Shooting Dogs is much more powerful and will get it across a lot better. Rwanda proves the whole divide and conquer thing effectively, because that policy ended in the genocide in 1994. Uganda, you'll get across this legacy of tribes fighting to be in charge through a film called The Last King of Scotland. And you may have heard of a country called South Sudan, and so South Sudan only exists because it was a way of trying to stop the fighting in Sudan, which had been ruled on the divide and conquer policy. All right, so choose whichever 2. You can do more than 2 case studies, of course you can, but I think if you choose to focus on 2, that would give you enough. Okay, so what we're going to do in the next video is we're going to talk about the essay title on page 36, which will take some of this knowledge and also some of the knowledge from the previous videos as well. We're going to develop this idea a little bit more. Okay, so I'll see you for another video very, very shortly. As ever, ladies and gents, any questions, any queries, drop me an email.